Hello and a very warm welcome to the channel. I have got another History Reacts video for you today and I'm very excited. So this is another request that one of you guys sent me via Instagram. So the Instagram details will be in the description. It's the best way to get hold of me. This is a history of India, and I'm delighted about this because India is a fascinating, amazing country. It's fast on the way to becoming the most populous country in the world. It is a future superpower, almost certainly in economic terms, but probably in military terms as well. It has an amazing history, but I don't know that much beyond a certain point. So I know that the Indus Valley was one of the first places where human civilization emerged, along with Mesopotamia, Egypt, China. Some amazing civilizations have occupied part or all of what is now India. So I'm thinking the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughal Empire, the Maratha Confederacy, for example. Obviously, it suffered a lot under European colonialism, or specifically British colonialism, and obviously there is an elephant in the room there, being British, and I know the British did some terrible things in India, for which I'm truly sorry about. But it's part of history, and I think we can address it as such. And of course, in the modern era, India has exploded really in the past 3 decades in terms of economic growth. It's had economic growth that any Western country would kill for. So I think this should be really interesting. The video is from Knowledgia. It's called The History of India in 12 Minutes, Part 1, because India's got so much history you can't fit it in one part 12-minute video. So anyway, without further ado, let's watch the video. Let's go.
The history of India is filled with incredible stories of thriving civilizations, religions, and cultures.
That's
dating
true.
all the way back to the Paleolithic Age. India's civilization is one of the oldest that we know and has played a part.
So that's a key point. So those of us who live in the West, in Western Europe, in North America, we obviously think we live in very advanced civilizations, which we do. But Western Europe until the 1500s or 1600s was a global backwater, or at least northwestern Europe. Whereas the great civilizations were in India, in China, in the Middle East. And it's kind of fascinating how that can change, and may change again in the future.
Art on the world stage for centuries, and even still today. While it is impossible to truly capture all of India's history in one video, it still serves as a worthy topic to delve into. Evidence of cave paintings and stone tools have revealed that the first signs of human activity in India can be traced back to somewhere between 400,000...
Is that a bull chasing a guy? Because the guy painting leaves something to be desired, but I mean, to be fair, it's prehistoric cave people. But that's what it looks like to me, a bull chasing a guy.
And 200,000 BC. Details concerning the civilizations inhabiting the region back that long ago do not exist, but we do know that one of the first sophisticated societies to walk the lands of India was the Harappan people, who likely existed throughout the first few thousand years BC. Positioned along the Indus River, the Harappan people had their own writing system, advanced social and economic system, and impressive urban cities and architecture.
Wow. So that is impressive. So this is several thousand years ago, a couple of thousand years BC. And there's already a civilization in India which had writing, which is kind of the building block of civilization. But not just that, they also had cities. So, by comparison, in the British Isles at the time, humans were living in very small tribes, or relatively small tribes, and chucking shit at each other. And that's barely an exaggeration. So that really brings home how much progress was made in this part of the world.
It is unknown why this civilization collapsed around 1500 BC, but some attribute their demise to the common floods and other natural disasters in the region, or potentially invaders from Western and Central Asia. The next known civilization to leave a mark on Indian history books was the Vedic Aryans. These people were initially migrants who spoke an early form of Sanskrit and were determined to stay true to their own tribal identity. The name they've been given, the Vedic people, comes from 4 sacred texts, or Vedas, that have presented researchers with a glimpse into this civilization's lives and beliefs. These Vedas are often considered to be the oldest Hindu scripts, and the Vedic civilization is believed to have spread their culture across a large portion of India by roughly 1000 BC. With them, the Vedic Aryans brought their philosophical beliefs. These ideas represent a theory that happiness and salvation come from a person's morals and ethics, and one's path should be based upon their place in life, but should always be righteous and good. The Vedic
That sounds really good. I love this philosophy. I don't know the exact details as to sort of. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but from what I've got so far, that's really cool.
Aryans also shared their societal system as they extended their reach. This system was made up originally of 3 tiers: Brahmin, or priest, Kshatriya, or warrior, and Vaishya, or commoner. The Aryans...
So that's very similar to European feudalism, where of course you have peasants, you have the landowning lords, and also you have priests who have all 3 of which have their different functions in society.
Continued to spread their tribal settlements across India throughout the following centuries as their own civilization grew and flourished in both
Feudalism in Europe, I should have clarified.
culture and trade. A series of 16 individual settlements or states spanned across northern India, including the Gandhara, Kosala, Kuru, and the Magadh. The latter particularly flourished under the rule of Chandragupta Maurya during the 4th century BC, as it began to expand, and its leader grew his own authority and worked to form the Mauryan Empire, which is believed to be the first.
So look at that, that is huge. So that is a big chunk of northern India, modern Bangladesh, part of modern Pakistan, and it's an empire I'd honestly never heard of, the Mauryan Empire. So this is why I love this kind of reaction video, because genuinely there's so much history I don't know. I mean, I did a degree in history, but obviously my education is very Western centric, and it's so great to learn about these other amazing civilizations.
First Indian imperial power. The Mauryan Empire established its capital in Pataliputra, near modern-day Patna, and constructed extraordinary temples, libraries, palaces, and even a university. The empire...
What are its tuition fees? I'm genuinely interested.
Trade success was impressive, and it maintained a remarkable governmental system and strong army. By the time of the 3rd emperor, the grandson of Chandragupta...
So, okay, oh wow, so it expanded big time. It's conquered or certainly like gained southern India and Afghanistan, which famously is unconquerable unless you're a Mongol, or perhaps one of these guys. Yes, that's a big expansion.
The stance of non-violence was taken after a bloody struggle against the kingdom of Kalinga.
So I'm assuming they took the stance of non-violence after they expanded into southern India and Afghanistan. I will see. I'm now really interested.
Due to the emperor's new Buddhist beliefs. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, had been born in 560...
So this is one of the amazing things about India. India is the home of 3 of the world's great religions. Hinduism, Sikhism and Buddhism all have their origins in India. And no other country in the world can claim anything even remotely similar. I mean, I suppose the closest would be what, modern Palestine / Israel, which can claim Christianity and Judaism. But no country can claim 3. I mean, the impact India has had on world religion is insane. Oh, hang on, wrong button.
BC. By the reign of Emperor Ashoka, the religious system he had founded was becoming more and more prevalent throughout India. Potentially due to their unwillingness to participate in conflict, though, the Mauryan Empire eventually dissolved in the 2nd century BC after the last line of the Maurya...
Wait, so this empire embraced kind of pacifist philosophy and then collapsed. I mean, who saw that coming? Is that genuinely, people who know more details, could you provide more depth? Is that was it just was it like an entirely pacifist society, because in which case it seems almost inevitable they get crushed, or was it just like pacifist elements within the society? I'm really interested. I mean, it seems that they were really nice people, and as always happens, or often happens to really nice people throughout history, they got screwed over.
line, Brihadratha, was murdered by his commander-in-chief, who would later found the Shunga dynasty in 185 BC. Despite the fact that Brihadrata's assassin Pushyamitra was rumored to have persecuted Buddhists, it appeared that Buddhism faced no decline concurrent with his rise to power. During Pushyamitra's reign, his kingdom maintained authority over a series of provinces as he stood his ground against other powers attempting to expand their territory towards his own.
So yeah, you can see why the pacifism wouldn't work long term when you're surrounded by expansionist powers.
After the monarch's death, though, his dynasty seems to have fallen in terms of importance. The dynasty is not known to have done anything notably relevant, and their control was short-lived. A variety of settlements and invading powers controlled India at this time, one being the Kushana kingdom, known for their significant trade involvement with Chinese, Persian, and Roman empires.
So this, of course, is one of the key points along the Silk Road, which extended all the way from China at one end to, well, the Mediterranean at the other.
Along the Silk Road, one Kushana ruler, Kanishka, in the 1st century AD, also converted to Buddhism, and helps to further the religion throughout the region. In 70...
So this is concurrent with the Roman Empire. So to the left in modern Iran would be Parthia. Of course, Iran being one of the other great civilizations through history. I mean, as well as China, which kind of surround India, and both of which have had big influences on it.
75 AD, the Kushana kingdom marked a new era, the Shaka era. A bit of distance from the Kushanas in the south, a handful of other powers rose, fell, and fought for supremacy amongst each other. The kingdoms of Satavahana, Chera, Chola, and Pandya were some of the major authorities in the south during this time.
So I'm not sure if Buddhism was still dominant at this point. I'm finding it fascinating how a religion which has pacifism as one of its tenets, to what extent that's obeyed or not, was able to spread quite so widely and influentially. Obviously, we already know that one empire fell, in part because apparently they embraced pacifist philosophy. So yeah, I'd love to know more about just how much Buddhism kind of ingrained itself in Indian society during this time.
Through the Classical Age, the Gupta Empire became the face of northern India during the Classical Age, and the majority of the region was united under their authority during what is often described as northern India's Golden Age. The reign of the Gupta Empire is regarded as a time of law and order, as well as cultural flourishing. The rulers of the empire were no strangers to military expedition, but aimed
because as we saw earlier, if you don't fight, you kind of get screwed. So
to expand their territory through peaceful means, such as martial alliances, no less than through military action. Though the Gupta Empire had extensive success over centuries, they eventually reached a point of decline between the 5th and 6th centuries as invading Huns from Central Asia began to annex and take over.
So that's really interesting. It's not clear. It's not just a coincidence that the Gupta Empire and the Western Roman Empire both went in decline at the same time, and both of them suffered attacks from the same steppe nomadic groups. Incidentally, some of the same steppe nomadic groups which terrorized Europe and terrorized northern India also terrorized China. The kind of the power of steppe nomads until the invention of firearms really was a terror on much of the civilized world.
Were the formerly dominant empire's land. As the religions of Buddhism and what later became Hinduism thrived, local and trespassing authorities continued to fight for territory and dominion over the following centuries.
So, of course, religion is so important in India's history. Not just Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, of course, also Islam, which was brought by one set of invaders, by Christianity, which was brought by another set. So yeah, religion is so important in India's history.
The next major shakeup of the Indian civilization came with the arrival of Islam. Muslim invaders began to send missions to India the century after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. A series of Muslim sultans began to lead expeditions into India, claiming places such as Sindh, Multan, and Somnath. These incursions brought the defeat of native kingdoms and the destruction of Hindu temples along the way. The Rajputs stood as one of the most determined defenders against Sultan invaders, but they were ultimately defeated in 1192 by Muhammad Muhammad Ghori and his forces. As Islam began to work its way into India, other previously
I've got to say, it's very impressive how Hinduism was able to maintain such a strong presence across India, considering that apparently they're kind of being persecuted and they're having their temples torn down. So that's impressive. Obviously, all religions should be allowed to live side by side as much as possible.
principal religions, such as Buddhism, began to decline. By the start of the 13th century, the era of the Delhi Sultanate's dominion arose. The first dynasty within the Delhi Sultanate was founded by Qutb-ud-Din Aibak. The slave dynasty...
So the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire are the two kind of great Islamic empires that formed in what is now India.
...controlled the Sultanate until around 1290, when the Khilji dynasty took over, first by the hand of Jalal-ud-Din Khilji. His family held the throne for less than a century, as the Tughlaq dynasty...
Wow! So I never realised a Delhi Sultanate... I always thought a Delhi Sultanate was like just based around Delhi. But they got almost all of India. That's the vast majority of the country, and modern Pakistan as well. That's, wow, it's huge.
He was next to seize power in 1320. The Tughlaq dynasty technically retained power until 1412, but matters were complicated by the incursion led by Timur in 1398 into Delhi. As the Tughlaq dynasty weakened, the Sayyid dynasty...
So this is a Mongol invasion. So once the Mongol Empire split up, when Genghis Khan died, it split into various different khanates. One of the khanates was at one point led by Tamerlane, who would invade and helped, well, his descendants, I think. I'm not entirely sure. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but I think his descendants helped set up the Mughal Empire.
Replaced them, starting in 1414. The Sayyids lasted for roughly 37 years, but the last ruler's reign was stained by rebellion and discord as the dynasty fell from grace. Yet another dynasty.
And you can see how much territory they've lost. They've gone from like nearly all of India to just like a heartland in the north.
Dynastic authority took the open throne, this time being the Lodi dynasty. The new dynasty lasted until the death of the then current ruler, Ibrahim Khan Lodi, who was killed in battle at Panipat by the army of Kabul's leader Babur in 1520.
So that's really interesting. So I know that there was one or two big Afghan invasions of India. And I presume this is one of them.
Ibrahim's death brought about the final end of the Delhi Sultanate as a whole. Now free of competition from the Lodi dynasty, Babur established the Mughal dynasty, which would end up becoming one of the greatest throughout history. The original Turkic-Mongol imperial power ruled a vast majority of India for over 2 centuries and brought about significant cultural growth and architectural achievements, including the Great Taj Mahal. Despite their
it is beautiful, isn't it? Like there's something in the architecture from around this time.
immense success, the Mughal Empire began its decline around the start of the 18th century, as revolt after revolt began to shake the foundations of the widespread power, alongside threats from the Marathas and the British. The British East India Company...
Yeah, the Europeans were arriving.
had actually already been in the region for some time, but the situation with the British started to escalate not long after the Mughals fell.
So originally all the European powers kind of had like trading posts, and you know, relatively small, and it wasn't just the British, it was the French as well, I think the Dutch, and they periodically fought each other with local Indian allies, but over time they expanded, and then as a result of European wars, both the French and Dutch were pushed out, so it was just left with the British. And of course, what's really important to remember is that the British did not conquer India with total opposition. The British always had local allies, and they would never have conquered India without local allies, including a lot of local troops. So sepoys, which were soldiers recruited for Britain or for the East India Company, who were local, were a huge part of the army. And were an essential part of the army.
By 1857, India displayed increasing control by the East India Company, and the locals were having...
So to be clear, this is it's a company, it's a private company. Obviously, it's very close to the British state, but it is not the same as the British state. It would be kind of like if Facebook went and conquered an empire. It's crazy, but it happened. I mean, I guess the Hudson Bay Company in Canada's kind of similar. But yeah, anyway, I think we're about to come to the Indian War of Independence, or mutiny if you're Indian.
None of it.
No, sorry, mutiny if you're British, beg your pardon.
What began as a simple revolt by Indian soldiers in Meerut quickly blew up into a widespread rebellion and became known as the Indian Mutiny of 1857.
So it's called the Indian Mutiny in the UK. I believe it's called the Indian War of Independence in India. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But again, this is one of those struggles where the fact that some Indians stuck with the British was crucial, because there were quite extensive revolts, but there also were areas who didn't rebel, who provided troops to crush rebellion, and that proved decisive.
This rebellion later would be called the First War of Indian Independence, and even though the British were able to quell the revolt after a matter of months, it inevitably had lasting impacts. In response to the mutiny.
And the British were very brutal in how they crushed rebellion. So, I mean, Indian cities were bombarded to, to smithereens and stormed. Some of the leaders of the rebellion were strapped to the front of cannons, and then the cannons fired as a means of executing them. It was very, very brutal.
On November 1st, 1858, Britain's Queen Victoria declared that India would be ruled in the name of the British Crown from that point on. Locals maintained their disapproval and anger at the British supremacy over their land, and nationalist sentiments and movements were far from extinct.
So to expand the British, so I mean, we're kind of going through quite a pace, but to expand, the British fought several wars against the Sikhs, the Sikh Wars. They fought wars against the Gurkhas. They fought a war in Nepal and Burma. They fought wars all around what is now India against various different enemies, with varying degrees of success.
Distinguished. The next major move towards independence came when Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress decided to withdraw all cooperation with the British government, beginning the non-cooperation.
So this was after the First World War. I mean, India provided a huge number of troops for the British Army, both in the First World War and the Second World War. Very brave troops as well. They achieved a huge amount, particularly fighting the Turks in the First World War and the Italians and Japanese in the Second. But it was an enormous contribution. But at the same time, as India was doing more and more, there was as we can see, there was a growing independence movement, quite understandably, within the country itself.
Movement following the end of World War I. When this strategy did not bring the wanted results, Gandhi adopted a new technique in the form of the civil disobedience movement in December of 1929. Essentially, the movement was made up of the declaration of an Indian Independence Day that would be celebrated on January 16th, and complete disobedience of any orders by the British government. Again, Gandhi's strategy failed, and this time he was even arrested, while many other rebels were murdered. Still, the British...
So this takes me to the film, I think it's Sardar Udham Singh, about a revolutionary who shot one of the guys, the British officer who led something called the Amritsar Massacre, which was when hundreds of peacefully protesting Indians were butchered by soldiers under British command. So it's a really interesting time, but the Indian sort of non-compliance movement, so not paying salt taxes or things like that, was very effective in kind of embarrassing the imperial authorities.
Which were eventually pushed into the Round Table Conferences beginning in November of 1930, the second of which Gandhi attended. The conferences marked another failure, and civil disobedience reignited. Gandhi's next attempt, the Quit India movement, again made no drastic progress. World War II brought about new issues as India was forced into war by the British, but at the conflict's conclusion, a new Labour Party came.
So interestingly, there were some Indian soldiers who fought on the other side. So particularly Indians who were captured by the Japanese, and then the Japanese formed kind of their own Indian Liberation Army to liberate India. I mean, I'm sure in practice, India being under the Japanese would probably been as bad, if not worse, than under European control. But you can totally understand why, if you're an Indian, you thought perhaps you were actually fighting to liberate your country.
Came into power in India and showed sympathy towards the fight for independence. Finally, as August 14th turned to 15th in 1947,
I had no
India
idea.
became an independent nation.
So I mean, this is the kind of the partition of India is a key point with obviously essentially into the Hindu and Muslim sections, and it was carried out incredibly violently. I think over 1 million people were killed in the kind of mass migrations between what is now Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. So I mean, the British split the country with the following discussions with Indian leaders and with Muslim leaders. So it was, I mean, and Gandhi was ferociously opposed to partition. He wanted a one India for all the religions, obviously, sadly. Or, well, I don't know. It's not for me to judge. Obviously, that didn't come about. But yeah, no, that was, I think that might be the end. But that was fascinating. Honestly, I love these videos where I know less, because it sort of feels like I'm back to primary school. Like some of this stuff, I'm sure if you're Indian, this is really, really basic, but especially some of the early stuff is completely new to me. So I really enjoyed that. That was fascinating. Of course, I will now do part 2. I think there's 2. I think it's just 2 parts. I'll have a look. But yeah, so if you made it this far, thank you so much. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and hope to see you on a future video. Thank you.